This is the Pro Wrestling Illustrated podcast. I'm your host, PWI senior writer Al Castle, back once again with my co-host Brian Solomon. How's it going, Brian?
Going pretty well, Al. Thanks, and glad to be back here again.
Yes, I think we're both kind of sleepy this morning. Doing this on a Friday morning. How's your summer so far?
Well, my son is not in any kind of a day camp at the moment. He's done with all day camp for the summer, so it's me and him. And if I sound a little bit tired, yet also happy at the same time, that's the reason why. Tired and happy, being a parent. That's what it is.
That's the thing. It's like, same. Like my kids are obviously home during the summer, and it's like on top of work, on top of everything else, it's like I've got to entertain these kids somehow.
You've got to break up the day. Yeah, I can't just ignore them all day. I mean, like I know I don't judge people. I know there's some parents that just put them in front of a TV for 8 hours or in front of an iPad for 8 hours. I just can't in good conscience do it. A couple of hours, sure.
I stop at 7.5 hours.
No, I have time limits. It's like part of the day you can do that a little bit. I'll do a little bit of work, but then we're going to hang out, or I'm going to, create some kind of stimulation, because I just can't. It makes me feel icky as a parent to do that.
Yeah,
anyway.
No, I agree, but then you'll like run out of ideas and I don't know, not to make this a parenting conversation, but like I've got
the parenting podcast, parenting and Wrestling Illustrated, PWI.
When they get to the age of mine, with 14 and 12, it's like a switch flips, and all the stuff that like was fun for summers for so many years isn't anymore. You want to go to the pool? Like, no.
Yes.
You want to go to the beach? No.
Yeah, I got to that point with my older kids, but now with my young guy who's 6, it's like hitting the reset button. So we're not there yet, which I kind of like.
But fun. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. There actually is wrestling news to talk about, other than just parenting stuff here. And a little later at the end of the show, we got a fun interview. It's been a while since we've done one of these. This one's kind of a short one. It was part of a promotional kind of junket day for the new season of Heels, the drama series on Starz, that is a kind of a fun fictional telling of a pro wrestling territory and a family that runs it. I got to talk to Stephen Amell and Alexander Ludwig, the two stars of the series. They play Jack and Ace Spade. Had a few minutes with them. Some of you might know Stephen Amell. He's got some history in wrestling. Made appearances in WWE and AEW. I think he's wrestled for both WWE and AEW. Good friends with Cody Rhodes. We talk a little bit about that. So a fun conversation. One of the things we talk about and kind of relevant, we're going to be talking a little bit about SummerSlam and Logan Paul getting this big match with Ricochet, is sort of like the new era of celebrity wrestlers, and how it's not enough to do kind of the Jay Leno thing anymore. That the expectations are really high now for celebrity wrestlers. And, we've seen it with Bad Bunny. We've seen it with Logan Paul. And Stephen Amell talks about how he thinks some of this might even kind of date back to him, that he was something of a pioneer in a celebrity wrestler that took it seriously. So a fun, short conversation. Stay tuned for that. And also we're going to be talking, I think where the conversation is going to go today is kind of dissecting the different philosophies between AEW and WWE and how they present wrestling. This is kind of a high-minded idea I've got here, but I think both shows have been so different as of late. The contrast is huge, and the success of the two is also pretty different, in terms of audience and what have you. And we'll talk a bit about, what's the takeaway from that. But right now, let me tell you about the latest issue of Pro Wrestling Illustrated. It is the October issue. We've got the World Heavyweight Champion, Seth Rollins, the new Impact Knockouts Champion, Trinity, and CM Punk all on the cover. Kind of a look at the summer in wrestling. A really fun issue. Trinity is the hot seat interview that I got to do with her, which was a lot of fun. We've got features in here about the World Heavyweight Championship, about AEW in its 5th year, a really huge section about top prospects. And this was really fun and I think was a really heavy lift to put together, but a very expansive look at some of the biggest prospects in the independent scene. and so much more. So what you want to do is go to pwi-online.com. You can pick up the one issue. You could, of course, subscribe. Now you can have a combo deal where you can subscribe both to the physical print edition and the digital edition. That way you don't have to wait for the magazine to come in the mail to start reading your PWI. And obviously, the longer you subscribe for, the deeper the savings. You could save almost half off the cover price. And the place to go, again, is PWI-online.com. Getting into our busy season, I think we can say we've already met and discussed the PWI 500. I don't know if we've got the whole 500 together, but we've got a good chunk of it. And you were part of that meeting. I mean, no spoilers here, but I'll say as lively a discussion, maybe even debate, I don't know if we'd call it heated, about number one as I can remember, and I've been doing this now, what is it, 15, 16 years. And, you get years like last year with Roman, where I think everybody comes to the table and it's like, yeah, it's Roman. Fair to say there was a lot of conversation this year. Dare I say some arguing, and ultimately consensus.
Yeah. And as part of consensus, there's always got to be compromise. If you have a debate like that, not everybody is going to get their way completely, because the nature of the debate is people have different picks. So, we talked it out. I think everybody, well, I can speak for myself. Everybody came away from it feeling good about it, strong about it, feeling that it was justifiable. I think that's important. Even if you say, well, the people, the order I wanted, or the people I wanted at top, or the person I wanted at top may not be there, but I can rationalize this. I could see it their way. It makes sense to me. I feel good about it. I think everybody walked away that way, at least I did.
Yeah, I thought it was sort of inspiring because, everybody was sort of so divided, and some of us agreed, some of us didn't at the beginning, and it really, I mean, it was like the 12 Angry Men thing, right? I mean, it was like we're never going to get on the same page about this, and names that at the beginning some people were like, no way in hell, people made the arguments, and positions changed. And again, no spoilers, but fair to say where we ended up would be a surprise to some of the folks who went into the meeting, and I'm sure would not have expected to arrive at that name. And there are some, I think it's also fair to say, some really interesting names thrown about this year. Folks who were in the mix. I mean, it's usually the kind of like the same names and faces. There were discussions about a very kind of like wide range of people. Don't want to get too much out of that. That's coming up next. Have you started work on it yet?
Not yet. No, not yet. I don't have the official assignments yet, but I think
yeah. I talked to Kevin. I think I've got the green light to get started on the top 10. So there goes my next several weeks. But yeah, obviously that's not one you want to miss. That's probably the biggest thing we do all year. And then we get into the ranking season, the women's list, the tag team list. Before you know it, we're doing the awards. So head on over to pwi-online.com. Actually, that's 2 issues from now. The next one is the PWI poll, which I helped put together with Kristen. And maybe that is a good transition actually to this discussion, because 2 of the questions that I don't want to give spoilers too much of the poll either. 50 questions about pro wrestling, and legit poll. We polled readers, and 2 of them that were back to back, and I think it's ones that we do every year. There's some that you'll see every year. Was what promotion has the best in-ring wrestling and in-ring action, and what promotion has the best storytelling? And I mean, I think it's okay to say it. AEW ran away with one, and WWE ran away with the other, and you can guess which is which. And again, I can't remember a time since AEW launched where those differences have been so stark. And talking about WWE, since we last recorded, we had Money in the Bank, we had the kind of final implosion of the bloodline, with and the shock of Jey Uso pinning Roman Reigns, setting up SummerSlam. that whole storyline. And when we were last talking, it felt like, are we kind of getting close to the expiration date? And it feels like there's kind of, new blood, new breath breathed into it. Meanwhile, and the numbers have been huge, right? I mean, I think SmackDown last week or the week before that set some kind of record. I think it was the first time that a wrestling program beat all shows on American broadcast, or American television. I think a Univision show got a bigger audience, but it beat everything else. And, there's just no two ways about it. WWE's doing huge numbers right now. They were in Madison Square Garden a couple weeks ago, and this is the kind of thing where, like, last second I might look at getting tickets, and the tickets were through the roof. I mean, it was such a hot ticket for an episode of SmackDown. Meanwhile, over on AEW, they've got their share of storylines and sports entertainment. Certainly with Adam Cole and MJF, that stuff is very kind of sports entertainment heavy. But clearly, the focus, the priority there is like star ratings, right? To that end, they've been doing great, right? I feel like every other week they've got a match that Dave Meltzer's calling the best match of the year. We saw it with Kenny Omega and Will Ospreay at Forbidden Door. There was a tag team match last week on Collision. It was Jay White and Juice Robinson versus FTR. That was, another hour classic. Had blood and guts this past week, which being talked about is, one of the great War Games matches of all time. I don't know what it's worth. I mean, I think Dynamite by its standards, had a pretty good number this week, but we've talked about how certainly Collision isn't setting the world on fire. You see images of some of these arenas for AEW, and they're not exactly packed. I'm going to Collision tomorrow night in Newark. I'll be curious to see I don't know a single match on it, and I'll be curious to see what kind of crowd they do in kind of that New York market. But one big setup, and I guess the question is, like, what's the takeaway here about what is the right way to present wrestling? And we talk about, if it works, it works. And, do the two different kind of fortunes of WWE and AEW suggest that, one way is the right way and one way is not?
Well, you would hope, or at least I would hope in a perfect world, that you could have a balance of both, right? I mean, there are a lot of fans that love the athleticism. They want to see great matches, but you can't just do it cold. I'm not saying AEW does it cold. They don't. But, you'd like to have a reason for the matches. You'd like to have investment. You'd like to care. This isn't the Olympics, right? This is professional wrestling. And one thing I think that's different between the two companies, and look, you can look at the numbers and just see what at least seems to be more appealing to building a wide, broad, general audience. That's the thing, which AEW doesn't seem to be doing right now, or seem to be showing that they're able to do. They have their core audience. They have their, X 100,000 people that would watch a test pattern if they put it on, right? Those people are there, the 800,000 watching Dynamite or whatever it is, 500,000 watching Collision. And I think if that's what you want to do, great. But I just, my understanding, what I don't understand is, if you're in the business at that high level and competing at that high level, and there's that much money invested, this is not an indie. You know what I mean? Why wouldn't you want to grow your audience beyond that? That's the thing. Sometimes I get disheartened by the WWE audience, which seems to sometimes send the message of, like, hey, you know what? If you want, Vince, you could just do a 2-hour show of talking and we would love it. Like, I was shocked at what happened with the Garden SmackDown, because
you're at matches or something,
right? Yeah. There were 3 matches. Now they gave them a dark match, world heavyweight title match for the live crowd. But if I went to that show, again, whatever, I'm a middle-aged man. Say what you want to say. If I bought tickets at that price and went to Madison Square Garden to see WWE, and I saw 3, even 4 matches, it's sitting there for what was probably for them almost 3 hours, I would be kind of pissed off. No matter how compelling those Bloodline segments are, and they are, I think they're leaning so heavily into it now because of the great response that they're getting, that they're saying, great, let them sit there, let them talk for a half hour. This is great TV. People love it. why should we rein it in? I get that. Again, like I wish there could be some kind of balance, because then I see things like, there was this thing that made the rounds that Vince Russo on his podcast was talking about, where it's almost like he's doing like a victory lap, saying like, see, I was right. People don't like wrestling. People want drama and characters. And it's like, to me, he represents an extreme of that thinking, where he's like just saying the matches need to be really short. People don't care about him. This is really essentially what he's saying. Like, just move on, give them characters, give them drama, without understanding that the matches are a major part of the storytelling. The matches should be where a lot of the drama is. So you can't just have promos and segments and vignettes. You can't build angles and storylines and then have the matches be an afterthought. That was the mistake I feel that he made 25 years ago, which was great for a couple of years and then imploded because it's not sustainable. So I think there's lessons to be learned here. If you're doing a pro wrestling show, you have to build it around the idea of pro wrestling. I'm not saying, again, it needs to be like the Olympics or like UFC, where it's just matches. Obviously not. But it needs to be built around the idea that the matches are where the feuds are settled and where the programs are built around, and the grudges and the titles. Like, everything else is the salad dressing or the window dressing or whatever analogy you want to give. So I'd love to see, it's a complicated answer to a complicated question. I'd love to see a balance. However, you can't argue with WWE's success right now. And I think that AEW, if they want to, really compete at that level, they have to take that into account, because look, that is what Vince established in the 80s. Wrestling was huge before Vince. We don't want to feed into that myth that, wrestling didn't exist before Vince. In the territory days, they had their sections and regions and fiefdoms that did really well, but nobody had broken through on a national level. Nobody was creating a product that was drawing in people that even didn't give a damn about wrestling, until he started doing what he did, which was to break the mold a little bit. And that kind of changed the paradigm, as they say. So I think that Tony Khan and AEW would be wise to listen to that, at least if they want to break out. Because look, no one's going to deny some of these matches are phenomenal. I'm not going to agree with you on the blood and guts. I really thought that was a horrible mess.
Oh, I'm with you. I'm not praising it, but I think it is getting praise.
Yeah, but that tag team match with the FTR and no, it wasn't FTR. I'm sorry. It was
it?
No, it was no, because that right. No, now I'm getting all mixed up.
Juice. It was Juice and
it was FTR. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I get FTR. Yeah.
Yeah, it was so great I couldn't remember who was in it. Right, FTR versus Bullet Club Gold, Juice Robinson, right, and Jay White was amazing. Like, one of the most incredible tag team matches I've ever seen. Kenny Omega versus Will Ospreay, again, an unbelievable match, very possible match of the year candidate. For people like us, I love that stuff, and certainly for people who listen to this podcast and read PWI, I think those are the more kind of serious fans, the really dedicated fans, where wrestling is part of your lifestyle, right? They're going to love and eat that stuff up, but you have to sometimes get outside the bubble, and I think it does take more than that if you want to have a giant mainstream audience, if that's what you want.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably oversimplifying it by saying or suggesting, there's the one company that does the storylines, the drama, and there's the other company that does the wrestling, the work rate. In reality, there's tons of great wrestling on WWE. Certainly on the what do they call them these days? PLEs, and for what you're saying, maybe that's the right formula. And if the idea is to build anticipation for a fight, well, that's what you're building anticipation, right? That's the end goal of storylines, is the pay-per-view, the PLE, and WWE has not, struck out on a PLE in a long time. I mean, they've got quite the streak of really good shows with really good wrestling
Yes.
on them, including Money in the Bank, which was really terrific. And even week to week, that Madison Square Garden show was something of an anomaly. I don't, most WWE TV shows do have more wrestling content. They're usually good for a Sami Zayn, Kevin Owens, 15, 20-minute main event, something like that are usually pretty good, or something with the Usos. So that is a little bit of an anomaly. The flip side of that is AEW, also has really intriguing, compelling, storylines as well. The Blood and Guts was the blow off to one, but we've seen that feud between the Elite and the BCC play out over months and months and months, and the stuff with Don Callis and Kenny Omega, and even more lighthearted stuff like MJF and Adam Cole. So I'm sure both Tony Khan and Triple H would say, "What are you talking about? We do those things too." They're two very good dishes. One's got a little more salt and one's got a little more sugar in it.
Yeah, and I also want to say that's true, because you made me think of something I had meant to say too, is that, and this complicates the issue even more, I think part of this debate depends even on how you describe what you call a great match. I don't think it's as simple as that. I love Dave Meltzer. I'm a Wrestling Observer subscriber. I am a disciple of Meltzer. But also, it has to be said that his judgment of matches, his criteria, his taste and aesthetic has colored a lot of this too, of what's considered a great match or not. And I think at times he's even admitted that, this is a guy who much prefers the Japanese wrestling style, for example, to the American wrestling style. And so I think sometimes you have to really be very outside the box in your thinking about it, because WWE has great matches. They may not be the kind of great matches that the AEW fans love or whatever. I think Roman Reigns has an awesome match every time he's out there.
Yeah.
I think, for example, on Raw, everyone's talking about the tag team match with FTR. It was amazing, and it was better than the example I'm going to give. But still, this week, what was it? The Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens match against Judgment Day what was that on? Was it on Raw? It was on Raw.
Yeah,
it was awesome. It was a fantastic tag team main event. But again, I think it depends on what you mean. Does it mean you're doing 1,000 moves and there's no psychology and nobody's selling and everybody's doing 18 kickouts and near falls and people love that? Or does it mean that it has sound psychology and it's planned out in a careful way, and there's a lot of character work in the match? Like, that's why people will say, look, the classic example, Hulk Hogan versus Andre the Giant, right? One of the greatest matches of all time. Those guys barely moved, So what's your definition of a great match? That's part of it too.
I think a really good example of what you're talking about was the main event of Money in the Bank, the Usos versus Roman and Solo, which was very paint by numbers, right? At least the first half to 2/3 of that match. I mean, they were not doing anything particularly special in that match. It was even, again, for the uninitiated, if you just sit down and you watch that without the context of the storyline of that match, it was even boring at times. But when it got going, and hit that crescendo, that was a great match at the end. And it was a great match because I might have to go back to, Brock Lesnar and The Undertaker at WrestleMania 30 in terms of a finish or a pinfall that had me. I mean, my jaw dropped when Jay pinned Roman Reigns, and they do such a they've done such a good job with building the foundation, kind of like the rules of this whole thing, that when the follow-up and this was at the Garden, right, where Roman gets on one knee and he puts the lay on Jay. It was just riveting. Again, right. I mean, we talk about it all the time. This was call the kids in from the other room television, and my kids, who these days don't care much, they saw that and they're like, oh, it's right. Shocking, right? I mean, Roman Reigns on one knee, like crowning Jay, and then obviously it's the swerve and all that. We were waiting for that, but just riveting stuff. Is this Triple H, right? Because WWE, Vince McMahon's loved drama. That is his vision for WWE. But for a long time now, we've talked about the Bloodline as one of the great wrestling storylines of all time. I'm getting to the point where we might be able to remove one of the. I mean, right. I can't remember. I've been watching wrestling for 40 years. I can't remember a better storyline.
Yeah, I mean, it would have to be up there. Like I always point to because one of the reasons why is it just keeps going and going and it keeps being engaging. The one that comes to mind for that for me is always Austin versus McMahon. But even that one, and look, Bloodline may get to that point too. Austin versus McMahon, people don't remember the bad stuff. People don't remember how it went on. It went on too long.
And what were the payoffs, really? I mean,
right.
they had some matches, but yeah, I mean, I think that was more like an era, right? I mean,
yes,
than a specific storyline, right? I mean, because yeah, there was a lot of stuff there that wasn't very good.
But it also goes to show, and this is one thing where they have in common, both of those, is if you invest in the building of the storylines, the establishment of the characters and who they are in a really engaging way, and sort of setting the rules, like you said, and the character work they do, it does a lot of the heavy lifting for you, because you could do a match where, like you said, somebody does a suplex and people are flipping out, losing their minds, whereas in a cold match or in a match between two guys where you're saying, oh, these are two of the greatest wrestlers in the world, wait till you see this match.
Right.
If they just do a suplex, you're like, okay, what's next? But you know what I mean? Like, it does the work for you. Whereas if you're not doing all that and you're just relying on, and I have air quotes, like great wrestlers and great wrestling, if you're just relying on that, you have to work a lot harder, and you see how they do. You have to really work a lot harder to get people to care and get people invested.
You know, that makes me think of Bryan Danielson and Okada, which I thought, well, this has to be like an 8-star match or something. You're talking about two of like the very greatest, and it was good. It was like it was a good match.
It was okay.
It wasn't the best match of the night.
And an example of that, look, because I don't want to sound like, oh, we love WWE, we're bashing AEW. An example of where WWE fell into that trap, if people may not remember this, a few years ago when they did, and I'm not saying there was no storyline, but
Nakamura?
Yes, AJ Styles versus Shinsuke Nakamura at WrestleMania, and everybody's saying, oh my God, this is going to be the greatest WrestleMania match of all time. This is going to be like having a Tokyo Dome match at WrestleMania, right? And it fell flat, and it was dull. Like, good. And it was not dull. It was okay. Yeah. It was a decent average match to the point where I think, wasn't there a story that like Vince was disappointed when they came back? He was just sort of like, the reaction was like, that was it. Like that's what it was. Like even he had higher hopes for that match than what it delivered. But that's an example of when they did it, they relied too much on the names of those guys, the expectations of how good they were in the ring. You just need more.
Yeah. And the other thing that made me think about that kind of in the opposite, in terms of making a little thing count was seeing the pop when MJF and Adam Cole hit the double clothesline, right? Yes. I mean, it's like, right, because you set that up, right? You set that up over weeks and weeks, and then the payoff for such a dumb move, and the crowd goes nuts. But this is clearly AEW's game plan, their strategy. We're going into Wembley Stadium, 70,000 people. We don't have a match, right? And I don't even know. I mean, I guess Cole and MJF, they could pull the trigger on that. There's a pay-per-view, I think, a week after that or something like that.
There's All In and All Out a week apart. Yeah.
So my sense is that, and maybe I'm wrong, but I kind of can't imagine how I could be wrong, is that the idea is going to be, let's put on a lot of really good wrestling matches, right? And I mean, the tickets are sold, so I guess it doesn't kind of make a difference. But I just don't know. And I think you really touched on it. What you end up doing is super serving the audience that you have, right? So for the fans that love work rate, love, the Dave Meltzer rating system and that kind of thing, they're going to enjoy it. But just objectively looking at it, that's not a universe that is growing. On that point, I mean, this is sort of related, but there's some news that came out this week about, I guess, AEW potentially moving to monthly pay-per-views. Do you have? I wonder if the demand is there, and if it is, and that's great. But they've now got, and this is, we talk about like pitfalls, and look, if they're making money, if Warner Brothers wants to keep on throwing money at them, that you put on as much wrestling as they want from you. But Now you've got 2 hours Wednesday night, you've got an hour Friday night, you've got another 2 hours Saturday night. I don't even know if they're still doing dark and all that stuff. Plus, Ring of Honor. What's the pay-per-view tomorrow?
Tonight.
Is it tonight? Yeah.
Yes. Death Before Dishonor. Al, come on.
Yeah, I didn't even know that it was in Jersey. I mean, and now monthly pay-per-views. I mean, does this give you reason for concern, or is the reality is that this is the formula that has worked for pro wrestling now for close to 30 years?
Well, when I've talked about this subject, it's interesting when the WWF did it in the 90s when they switched to monthly pay-per-views. At that time, I remember thinking it was a bad idea from a fan perspective. I can understand why they did it, but it made things very cluttered. But what it did was it changed the model of how they were doing business. This is the difference between the two companies. Now, AEW, they've done a handful, but AEW doesn't do house shows. That's not their thing. They do weekly television, and that's it. So that was not what WWF was doing. WWF, and still are, they're on the road constantly. And what they would do is in these big gaps in between the pay-per-views, because WWF would only have like 3 or 4, you built your house show programs. And it was all about, you remember those days, like between WrestleMania and SummerSlam, there was a huge gulf of time. You're not building to SummerSlam for months. So you're building up your house show matches, like come to the arena and see this and see that. And there would be matches that paid off and feuds that paid off before you even got to the next pay-per-view.
I mean, Hulk Hogan's run as champion was whatever it was, 4 years. And in that time, how many title defenses were there on pay-per-view? How many dozens of feuds that he had that were never paid off on
pay-per-view? I mean, I seriously think there was probably like 3 pay-per-view title defenses in 4 years. It would be WrestleMania 2 and 3 and the Wrestling Classic. And that was it. But there was Saturday night's main event. Those were on TV. There were a few of those, but hardly ever. But that's the way the business was then. The difference with AEW and why I think it's a good idea for them is that since they're not doing house shows, and so there was nothing to build to in between these huge gaps of time between pay-per-views. So it felt like a lot of stuff was getting lost. Things were happening. And I know we've talked about this. You'd forget what happened. There was this huge gulf of time in between giant shows. And so they would do things. They would try to make the Dynamite seem more special. They would have like themed Dynamites and things like that, because otherwise it just seems like stuff happens, matches happen, and then you forget about it the next week, which has been a big problem with AEW because they don't have anything else to build to. They're not building house show programs. So all they're doing is focusing on the weekly television. So because pay-per-views are television, I think it helps because then you have these giant TV shows every month or every other month, let's say, that you can build to, that you could have as your destination. And I think it would make everything cohere a little bit better because, they're just two different businesses. WWF of the 90s and AEW of the 2020s, it's a very different business model. I think it works for them. I was a little frustrated when WWF did it way back when.
Yeah. I think I largely agree. And if anything, one of the problems that AEW has is that it feels like it, and it's the kind of thing that maybe down the line you regret complaining about, but I just feel like it's really far between pay-per-views.
Yeah.
And what's stranger is even with those huge gaps, sometimes or often they don't really kind of kick into that third gear promoting a pay-per-view until 2 weeks out or something like it. So you really have months of television where you don't want to say it's sort of like directionless, but sometimes you do wonder like, all right, so what is the next big feud for MJF or what have you?
I don't think there's a downside to AEW doing it. That's what I'm trying to say. Like with WWF, there was an upside. There's more pay-per-view revenue. It's great, of course. But the downside was that they pretty much gave up on their house show business at that point.
Right.
Like they were admitting like the house shows were just icing on the cake. They weren't really that important anymore. And a lot of people were sad about that. But with AEW, there's what have you got to lose? What have you got to lose by doing?
Yeah, and it's all revenue, and even and this goes for all issues of like content creation. Everybody, certainly myself included, have complained over the years about Raw being 3 hours versus 2. Triple H has complained about it, but the reality is that USA pays them, whatever that is, 50% more to add that third hour.
rough.
And if Warner Media is gonna keep on pumping in money and saying give us more, you give them more. That you're in the business of making money. And you're right. I mean, if there's interest in monthly pay-per-views, even if each one maybe doesn't draw as well as the quarterly ones do it, I mean, there's probably going to be less interest in each one. But WWE's done a good job of, and I guess they're not quite monthly these days, but there's certainly still 10 or so a year. But there are the tent poles, right? I mean, that the Royal Rumble is special, and SummerSlam and WrestleMania, and AEW now has whatever it is, 4 or 5 years of their own tent poles. So they probably could add some shows and still keep a Double or Nothing and All In and what's the other one, Full Gear, feeling a little
Revolution.
more special. So yeah. One of the last things on AEW. A lot of talk over the last couple weeks about these banned moves, and again, this sort of like seems to be kind of a contradiction of, again, wanting to go all in with the action and the physicality. Certainly we saw it in Blood and Guts, and yet at the same time, this kind of laundry list comes out of all these things that you're not allowed to do. I got to say, by and large, it seemed perfectly reasonable to me. It seemed like responsible stuff. Don't go fight in the crowd. It seemed like a lawyer went through it, right? And for good reason. And I actually think it's a really good idea to rein some of these guys in. We've talked about how some of the frustration we have is that there is, it is what it is. A kind of indie mentality with AEW of just go in and get all your stuff in the match, and really to a flaw sometimes. I follow some like Facebook groups that are like and this, there's trolling and it's not totally fair, but like AEW botches, and some of the stuff really is beyond amateur hour, and these are talented men and women, but some of these spots that they do are they look bad, they're dangerous, they shorten careers, and there's a good reason, I think, why you don't see a lot of that in WWE. And I know the hardcores will criticize, but that stuff shortens careers. So, like a reverse Hurricane Run or something where a guy just can't even see it coming lands on set. It's like, bumps on the hard part of an apron. And WWE does that all the time too. And they always make for like, that jaw-dropping moment. But every time I see them, I mean, I cringe because there's no give there. That's why you do the spots. So when you saw that list, anything jump out at you as unreasonable?
So there was nothing really that I thought was bothersome. I think the first thing you got to say, though, is a list like that, it's not really meant for fan consumption. You don't want fans.
I'm going to pull it up if I could find it.
But it's far less restrictive than anything WWE has in place, as far as we can tell. That's for sure. And I think it's honestly, it's common sense stuff that any major or serious wrestling company should have in place. See, what I like about it is there are a few things that are out and out banned, which I think I don't have any problem with anything that is. But most of the things on there, it's just common sense. They're not saying don't ever do it. I think that's where WWE runs into problems, is they're so extreme. It's like all or nothing. And I don't mean, where it's like, you just never do this, never do that, never do this. With the AEW list, it's more like, let's talk about it. Let's decide if this is the best time to do
it. Because I'm looking
at
it
approved now,
and Blood and Guts would seem to like have violated almost all of these.
Not really, because it's like, I'm sure they followed the guidelines by saying, we're going to clear all this, we're going to plan it, we're going to get the green light. That's what's built into the guidelines that I like, because it's not just where they're saying the source of this, I think, is not just where they're saying there's all these things we shouldn't do because they're terrible and they're dangerous or they're bad business. The source of it is also people looking at the shows and probably saying, this is all over the place. This is very disorganized. You shouldn't have like 4 different people getting color all over the card. And if we're going to have somebody in the main event do this spot, this crazy spot, why would we have somebody do it in the opening match? Like, I think a lot of it is that. Let's get everyone on the same page and say, okay, who's doing what? When are we doing it? Why are we doing it? Okay, you're allowed to do this move because it's this situation. You're not allowed to do this move because it makes no sense in your match whatsoever. Like, they're trying to do common sense things, and which I think is great.
Yeah, I mean, the other side of AEW putting so much emphasis on kind of the physicality is, put good wrestling aside, is the blood and gut stuff, and I don't just mean the match, but the gore and when they first launched, that was how WWE was sort of dismissing them, right? I mean, that's how I think they came to the name Blood and Guts, right? Wasn't
Yes,
that
Vince said it. Vince used the phrase in a stockholders call.
right? And at the time, I think there was a lot of thought that like, well, that's kind of an unfair characterization of the AEW product. And then you see a match like Blood and Guts, and you think like, well, and there's, I don't want to exaggerate, but there's a healthy amount of that, throughout the product that did not happen in a vacuum. I thought I didn't like it either. I thought it was garbage. Bed of nails. John Moxley, and I know people love him, and I think he's a super terrific guy. He's the MVP of AEW. He is Mr. AEW. But to his own detriment, sometimes he just goes too far with this stuff. I don't have a whole lot of use for digging a spike into somebody's head and stabbing them with it. The broken glass, I don't know. And just from a business standpoint, the contradiction sometimes. I was just you thinking the other day how like after Jay Briscoe died, they could hardly mention it because they had Warner had this issue with some remarks that Jay had made. But you're okay with this being on television,
right. It's
like
mind-boggling. Yeah, it's really bizarre that would be the hill that they would die on of all things. And I'm not defending what he said, but I mean, again, common sense. Think about what you're putting on your show,
Yeah, and there was a lot of blood, and again, it's not the only place. I mean, AEW goes to that well quite a bit, So, I'm not a huge fan of it, but I think it's a good point you make that maybe banned is not even the right term, but it's sort of like clear it first, right? And I think that's fine, right? I mean, the Undertaker was always able to do his tombstone even when pile drivers were banned because there was understanding that he knows what he's doing and he could do it safely.
That's why I wish even WWE would loosen it up a little bit like that and say like, look, okay, we're not going to say we never do any blood of any kind. If you're in a Hell in a Cell match and it's this intense, crazy feud and you guys hate each other and we're going to have you slamming your head into the gate and all this stuff, we're going to allow a little bit of blood in that match. Otherwise it looks dumb. Like, again, it's common sense, common sense.
Yeah. And again, we started this conversation talking about like the difference in the presentations and we got Blood and Guts this past week and it wasn't that long ago. Last November we had a WWE's version with War Games, and you couldn't have two more different presentations. I mean that's everything that I'm talking about, right? Where AEW's was about blood and guts and gore and bed of nails and broken glass and shoving spikes in people's heads. And not just that, but also like just crazy bumps all over the place. And WWE's was about, which side is Sammy on, right? That was the big payoff, right? And when they got that payoff, that crowd went nuts. I was there in Boston for it. And it made that match so great, when Sammy low blowed Kevin and proved his allegiance to the bloodline at the time. This is now, many months ago, but this match, War Games, which is kind of sold on violence and all of that, what made that match was the storytelling, So it's the different philosophies. Neither's right, neither's wrong, but clearly one company's having maybe that's not even fair, but at least domestically, WWE is having more success, I would say, than AEW. On the topic of WWE, SummerSlam is now a couple weeks away. One of the biggest shows of the year. I gotta say, like, if you told me months ago that they would go to Ford Field, SummerSlam, one of the biggest shows of the year, with this card, I would have been surprised. Coming off of like WrestleMania, the thought was, is this where they do the rematch of Cody and Roman? Is it something? If not, it's got to be something bigger than that. And it's Roman and Jay, of Roman and one half of a tag team, and a match that we saw years ago on some B level pay per views. It is the third Brock Cody match. It is the second Seth Finn match. So a lot of rematches on such a big show, and yet it feels like a big show. I think Roman and Jay feels like a
Yes.
a stadium worthy main event.
They made it important, and that's their job. Like, that's the job of wrestling promotions. It's like there's so many matches that you could look back on, great memorable matches or builds, and you go to yourself, well, if we take the build away, like, this really is not a very special match on paper at all. Like, there's a lot of examples like that where you're just like, who cares? But they set the table. They made you care about, like you said, a match that happened 3 years ago between Roman Reigns and a tag team wrestler. On paper, that's what it is. But because of all the work that went into it, that's totally not what it is at this point. And, the same with, I feel, this is just me, I feel with Cody Rhodes and Brock Lesnar, even though I still think, never going to stop saying it, that Cody Rhodes should be the champion right now, and everything would be better if he was. They've made people care about this. It makes sense. It's the rubber match. Now, hopefully, if anything in this world makes sense, Cody is going to win this one. Otherwise, the whole thing to me seems to be for no reason, but makes people care. I don't know so much if I'm on board with the Seth Rollins and Finn Balor thing. I don't feel like I need another one of that, or I need that to happen again as much. But again, it just points to the fact that this is WWE's strength, that they will work very hard to make you care about the matches they have and the people that they're matching up, even if on paper it may not seem like the greatest thing in the world. Whereas I think sometimes, again, doing comparisons, what AEW falls into the trap of is the exact opposite, which is they will be hoping that just seeing these two names versus each other is going to make you care. And sometimes we don't really need to do anything else. And I think that's a problem.
The context of Seth and Finn that I think they're banking on, and I don't think they're necessarily wrong, is the Judgment Day is a really hot act now, right? And
Yes,
again,
true.
kind of full circle, I think they're taking lessons from the Bloodline, right? And now applying that to the Judgment Day, and you think about, Judgment Day started this thing with Edge a couple of years ago, and kind of wasn't a fully formed idea. And now you've got the personalities. You've got people kind of looking suspiciously at each other. Not a copy of the Bloodline, but some of the same dynamics. There's just good storytelling, right? Kind of a potential like fight for power. Damian Priest has got the Money in the Bank. When he came to the ring in their match, Seth and Finn's match, and there was all this kind of like, why are you coming out now? That's all really good stuff. Rhea's a star, right? Rhea might be one of the biggest stars in WWE. She I'd say is the leader of Judgment Day. I don't know if she actually is, but I think she's viewed that way. Dominic is fantastic. Dominic is so great. One of the most over heels in all of wrestling. Totally gets it. Pissed off a bunch more fans by winning the North American title in NXT, driving everybody crazy. But everybody, I think, is playing their role so well right now. Finn might be the least interesting in a way of all the people in Judgment Day right now.
I think that might be part of it, and he also seems to be the one who belongs the least in the group, to me anyway. I always go like, what is he doing in that group? It just doesn't feel like a good fit for him.
Yeah, and maybe they break him out. And I always thought he was a better babyface than a heel. I think so. I don't know if that's where they go. What do you think of the job Damian Priest has been doing? I thought his coming out party was the Bad Bunny match where he was just so great and did such a terrific job of carrying Bad Bunny and delivering a terrific performance. And I think got the Money in the Bank briefcase as a reward, and I could absolutely see him cashing in and winning the World Heavyweight title.
I was going to say, I kind of think that might be where this is going, and that might be why they even booked this match again to set up basically an implosion of Judgment Day. Because I think what you could very well see is either Seth defeats Finn again, and then he's exhausted. Damian Priest cashes in, wins the title. That creates a huge rift between Finn and Damian Priest, who basically just feels like you just totally overshadowed me. I basically softened him up for you. Or even if you go the other way and you have Finn Balor. Now, how amazing is that? Finn Balor, who held the Universal title for like a day, right? Finn Balor beats Seth Rollins. Yay, I'm the champion. All right, 5 minutes later, he loses it to Damian Priest. I mean, again,
they could absolutely do that.
That's a Judgment Day implosion if that happens. So, I mean, again, this is WWE, right? From a storyline perspective, this match definitely makes sense. I just don't know if I'm that psyched to see it, as much as a match. And again, I know I don't want to just be the guy who's like, well, this person should have won that and this person should have won that. But I'm also in the camp of like, why didn't LA Knight get that briefcase? I mean, I felt like that was the move. Yeah. And so I'm still harboring my bitterness from that, of the people who were like, well, LA Knight is 40 years old, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, Damian Priest is 40 years old, Yeah. So, I mean, I think with what we've got without all the fantasy booking, I can kind of see where it's going. And it does make sense from a storyline point of view.
I want to come back to LA Knight in a second, but again, on the World Heavyweight title, I do think like some of this stuff is making the case for the creation of the World Heavyweight title having been a good idea. I mean, whether they did it the right way, it was a little clumsy, but there is a case to be made for having two world titles, because there is some genuine intrigue about this title, and there is the thought that, oh yeah, Finn could beat Seth, Damian could cash in, and he could become champion. It doesn't feel, and it is a byproduct of Roman being so strong in that role. But we talk about being excited to see Jey Uso and Roman Reigns, and I'm really excited. I think Jey's been one of the highlights of all of WWE, and I've said the MVP of the Bloodline storyline, but I don't think anybody seriously thinks that Jey Uso is beating Roman Reigns for the world title. So I like having a world title that is kind of like, in the mix, right? I mean, that you could see it lost and won on any given day.
I like it too. I mean, I'm not going to dispute what they're doing with Seth is working. I still think there were different ways to do it. Yeah. I'm still thinking like, yes, this is working with this belt and everything. But then on the flip side of it, I look and I go, I still don't know if it justifies having the two world titles, because I look at Roman and I go like, he doesn't really need it. Like everything that's happening right now would be at the same level without it.
Yeah, but then Cody would have it, but Cody would also feel like kind of like a beatable champion. Yeah.
Right, but I think there's still a way. I guess what I'm saying is to bundle everything up into one world title and have it matter, and then still be able to do your alternate main event program, right? Like they used to have A and B shows, without that necessarily needing another world title. It could still be a main event with huge stars without necessarily needing a world title. It's like, WrestleMania 8. If they did WrestleMania 8 today, you would have had Ric Flair versus Randy Savage for the WWF title, and then you would have had Hulk Hogan versus Sid Justice for like the Universal title, right? That's how they would have done it. You don't need to do it. They didn't need it then, and I don't think they need it now. You don't need to have a world title to have a main event.
Yeah. Going back to LA Knight, I have a feeling we may disagree some here. It is fascinating what's happening with him, and when we were raving about the NWA a couple of years ago, he was one of the real highlights. I mean, that's I know he was on Impact before that, and that's where I first saw him. But the first time I really took notice of the guy was in the NWA. As Eli Drake, and it's essentially that character. I mean, there's not a lot of change. He's doing the Eli Drake character, which is just him, and it's getting over huge. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But I gotta say, I don't know that I'm completely sold. I don't know how much of it is I know what the word is for it, mass hysteria. I just think it's like it's become a thing. And so
That's how people
everybody,
get over, though.
yeah, but I don't know. I like the guy. I think he's super talented. I don't see him in a main event role in WWE. I don't see him. Could he get a main event match here or there? Yes. I think he's better than his current positioning, and I think he's going to move into a position that is more suited to him. In upper mid card act. I don't see him at the tippity top of WWE.
Right, but no, and I don't disagree with you, but I also think that's the mistake that people are making who are dismissing him and saying, "Well, you can't build around this guy. He's 40 years old. He's this, he's that. How many more years does he have in the tank and whatever?" I get that, but I'm not even saying that he doesn't need to be the guy. He doesn't need to be like Steve Austin or he doesn't need to be somebody. He doesn't. Well, a better example is John Cena. He doesn't need to be a John Cena who's going to be like the top guy for 12 years or whatever. I'm just saying, break him through, definitely establish him as a bona fide main eventer where he's a guy who's in the mix. He's a guy who fans see as, give him a world title reign or two, like
Really?
establish it. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Establish him as somebody who's in the mix. I'm not saying he's going to be the guy. Like I look at a Cody Rhodes and I go, he could be the guy that carries the company. I don't necessarily see that for LA Knight, but what I do see is a main event player, a guy
I don't
who's
know.
up there with the rest of them, who's at the level of a Seth Rollins and a Roman Reigns and a Brock Lesnar and a Cody Rhodes, who's like in that rarefied air. Absolutely, yes.
Based on what? What do you see, and what do fans see in him? I know he's a great talker. In a lot of ways, I think the appeal is that he's kind of a throwback, right? I mean, he's a good looking guy with a good body
Mm-hmm.
and really good mic skills, and is fine in the ring.
Right. He's the example of he's the classic WWE star. It almost makes you wonder, like, it's like, where's he been all this time? What took him
Yeah,
so
they had
long?
him years ago, and
Ye-
and Vince McMahon had him last year and wanted him to be a manager.
right. He's because I think he might be a little on the small side. Maybe that's usually what they say to the guys that
Yeah,
are a little on the small side, like the Adam Coles and stuff. I think he's tailor made for their product. Okay, yeah, he's not going to have the 5-star matches every time, but to me, he's somebody like, and I'm not saying he's The Rock or Steve Austin, but he combines elements of what made those guys work. And I know like Kevin Nash kind of had a whole thing where he was citing that as a negative on his podcast, like that he's derivative or that he's a knockoff or a ripoff. And I don't deny that there's elements that are in there, but everyone does that. Everybody takes things from other people and make it work. Like I think what people respond to him about him is his confidence. He has a
yeah.
kind of a swagger about him. He's got very, good catchphrases. You can't deny that those things they work, getting people to respond to that kind of stuff. I mean, look, I personally hate this, but half of what Seth Rollins has going on right now is that people like to sing his song. I mean, like that's
Yeah.
a major part of why he's so over right now. And so I think like an LA Knight, he comes out there and he's just got, what it is? He's got like an it factor, those things that are hard to articulate that it when you see it, that yes, people like Austin and Rock had, where you just see them and you go, Steve Austin, okay, he's a guy that's been mid-card for years. WCW kind of treated him as he's the TV champion, but he's got something that's not being capitalized on. And I think I'm not saying that LA Knight is Stone Cold Steve Austin, but he's got something in that regard that like has been overlooked for years and years, that just he walks out there and there's a connection with people. There just is.
I think the really cool thing about his story is that he is the one guy who survived working with Bray Wyatt, right? Because and
I
that's
know.
really where
I
this
thought that was the
all
end of him.
originated, right? I mean,
Yeah.
like, and the idea was that he was just going to be fed to Bray Wyatt. And even when they picked him as like the first like opponent for Bray in this latest run, it was like, really, LA Knight? That it was so odd. But he got camera time and he got mic time, and he stole those segments, right?
Yeah,
And
and I
then
think that's when the bloom was already coming off the rose with Bray Wyatt, was because of
right,
that
and
partly.
then they had the horrendous match at the Royal Rumble, and then Bray's gone, and everybody, I was in, the bigger place that even more than Money in the Bank, that I thought was a huge mistake was the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal in LA, in the building, and I was there for it, the SmackDown before WrestleMania, and everybody's just going crazy for LA Night. You're in Los Angeles. Does Bobby Lashley really need to win that battle royal? It doesn't mean much of anything, but it would have been a little feather in his cap, and giving him a little boost. That was
Yeah.
and that's the kind of thing that you could absolutely give to LA Knight.
Of course, Bobby Lashley shouldn't have even been in the Battle Royal,
Right.
let alone win it.
Because Bray Wyatt, another guy who did
Right.
who did not survive Bray Wyatt. Thanks so much, Brian. Before we head out of here, and I'm sent to the interview. Anything promote? How's the Gorilla Monsoon book coming?
It's going really, really well. I actually am excited to say I was just able to interview Bret Hart for the book, which that
Nice.
was such a great thing. I have to thank Ross Hart for that, because I'd been talking to his brother Ross for a while now. He was one of the first people I interviewed for the book, and who I knew through mutual friends, and he was able to connect me to Bret. And I'm even hoping, well, I don't even want to jinx it, but I'm hoping that there might even be a chance that he might be able to write the forword to the book.
Oh,
Because
wow.
as people know, the connection is that Gorilla Monsoon gave him the
Excellence of
nickname
execution, yeah.
Excellence of Execution. And not only that, but when we got to talking, I really learned how much Gorilla Monsoon really championed Bret Hart in the company. He had a
I think
history
that
with,
came through in the
yes,
commentary because Brett was very much a mid Carter. We talked about Jey Uso, half of a tag team, and whenever Gorilla was on commentary, he really made the point that this guy is something special.
yeah, even when he was a heel, and even when he was part of a tag team, he still put him over. He had a history with the Hart family. If people may not know, early in his career, Gorilla Monsoon wrestled in Stampede for Stu Hart, and there was and he like got stretched in the dungeon by Stu Hart. Like, there was a connection there, and he never forgot it. He always put over the Hart family on commentary. If people remember, like, he always talked about Stu and Helen Hart, and to the point where he manifested it almost into like a storyline. He constantly talked about them. So anyway, like, I was very, very grateful to get a chance to talk to him about what Gorilla meant to him. So that'll be like one of the cornerstone interviews of the book for sure. I'm in the process of just transcribing countless interviews right now. So I'm hopeful that very soon I'll be able to start the actual writing of the book, which, anyone who's written a book like this knows, it takes a long time before you get to that point. So I'm getting there.
Are you an Otter.ai guy for transcribing?
Yes. So for the Chic book, I didn't use it at all because I tried it once and I was very unhappy with the results, because it got all the names wrong and so much of the wrestling terminology wrong.
Yeah.
You got to go over it. So what I did with the Chic book is I did everything by hand and everything myself. It took a very long time. What I decided to do this time is I'm using Otter AI to transcribe the interviews. I'm sure this is fascinating to people. I'm using Otter AI to transcribe the interviews, and then going back in them and running through them with the audio and fixing mistakes, which sounds like it takes about just as much time as before, which it probably does, but it's less mental anguish and aggravation than having to type out every single word yourself. So that's what I'm doing now with the Gorilla book.
Yes, I very much agree. I've used it for many a hot seat interview, and usually the stuff that needs correcting is me and not the interviewee. Trinity is a good example. Everything she said came through perfectly in Otter AI. My questions were a garbled mess.
Right.
But looking forward to that. It's going to be a great book.
Thank you.
You have a thought? I mean, you think a year, or how long before it's out there?
Well, all I can say is that the due date for the manuscript is next May. Now, I
Okay.
don't have a date for the publication of the book, but just judging by that, and judging by, even if I needed a couple of extra months, I would say you're either looking at the end of 2024 or maybe early 2025 at the latest. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, wow, that's a big commitment. Wow, very excited about that one. Brian, thank you so much. And you can follow us both on Twitter. Our Twitter handles are down below. Alcast PWI, Brian R. Solomon, and of course at official PWI. Right now, let me throw an interview that I conducted with the stars of Starz heel series Heels, which is available on Starz. It is Stephen Amell and Alexander Ludwig. Have you ever watched Heels, Brian?
I've never seen it. I mean, I've always been meaning to and wanting to, but I've never actually checked out the show.
Yeah, I had never seen an episode until after I did this interview, and it was this interview that got me interested in it. So we got the DVDs, and I'm most of the way through season 1, and a fun show, a very respectful take on pro wrestling. So check it out, and check out my interview right here with Alexander Ludwig and Stephen Amell.
All right, what's up, Alexander? What's up, Stephen?
How you doing, man?
How you doing, Al?
Good. So I'll jump to it. Obviously, we're coming from the pro wrestling magazine industry, so that's what we're interested in talking to you about. Stephen, you're one of ours. I think kind of officially adopted into the pro wrestling family. But I'll ask you some wrestling related questions. You know, the one thing that I think is really fascinating about Heels is this whole idea of how the person who's portrayed as a villain on television might be a decent person. The person who is the baby face on television, maybe not so much. I don't know how much both of you have some experience here, but maybe you in particular, Stephen. I mean, has that been your experience being around some folks, and not to speak ill of baby faces who maybe aren't so great, but have you found at least maybe some villains on TV who are actually really sweet guys?
Yeah, no, listen, I've been so fortunate. Almost everyone that I can't even really think of an exception. I at one point in time thought Roman Reigns was a little bit standoffish back in 2015, but I talked to Cody about it, and he was like, "No, that's his process. The guy couldn't be more of a sweetheart." So I've been very, very fortunate that any interaction that I've had in the business, legends, Hall of Famers, new guys, up and comers, everyone's so pleasant, and the moment that you do something, or you do something either in the ring or in a public forum, you show just a basically like a tacit amount of respect for the business. It's like you're in forever, and you're treated like you're one of them. And I'm sure, Alexander, the next time that you go to a wrestling event, just because of how much respect this show shows to professional wrestling, you'll get the same treatment. Believe me, it's crazy.
Yeah. And Alexander, for you, I mean, what is that acting challenge of there being so many levels? On one hand, being a hero to fans. On the other hand, having this other side of you that maybe makes that something of a hypocrite. And did you watch wrestling to study where maybe some people have been just that character?
I wasn't really indoctrinated into like wrestling the way that Steven was, but I did watch it as a kid. Edge was my favorite, and Adam ended up being one liking. So we're very close friends, and I've heard so many stories from him about his experience, including actually Dwayne Johnson as well. When I was 16, I remember him telling me stories of what it was like behind the scenes, or what it was like when you start shooting, and things don't go as planned. And to me, that was always fascinating. The characters that I've always been drawn to are flawed, and Ace is dealing with a serious identity crisis. So both in the ring and in real life. And I love that. And I think most people are flawed. There is a good person in there, but you don't get to see it. I will say, in my experience, and Stephen has a lot more than I do in the pro wrestling world, but the heels I've met are, and funny enough, actually in acting as well, they're usually some of the nicest guys in the world, right? So it's pretty funny how that works sometimes, but it's been such an honor, and I think you're all nuts. I tell Adam that too. I think the world is absolutely insane, and I have so much respect for everybody who does it, because it's an art in its own way, and it's a huge performance. And it's I can barely last 5 minutes, let alone it's just the most pain I've ever experienced in my life, and I'm here for it. We want to do right by the community the best we can.
Yeah. By the way, that's one of the things that I hear people lament nowadays, that friends of mine in the business. There are no true heels anymore. There's like one. Like MJF is like a true heel right now.
Well, I think we mentioned the other one.
But Yeah, Roman's up there, but there's still nowadays. It's like you want to be a heel, but you want to be the cool heel, not MJF. He just wants people to hate him.
You know, it's funny. Did I ever tell you? I talked to him on the phone.
You did tell me.
Yeah, he's acting a little bit as well. We got to get him in the show.
You know what? It would have been a lot easier. It would have been a lot easier about 6 months ago.
Yeah,
he's blown up.
I know we got to wrap here, but Steven, because you mentioned some of this, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about celebrities in wrestling, and it feels like you were among that first group to take it super seriously. Coming off of the years of Jay Leno, and some people are sort of half making fun of it. Now you see the Logan Pauls of the world and Bad Bunnies who are really pushing it to another level. What can you say about that? And why do you think that is that you've got this new breed of celebrity wrestler that will really go all in?
Well, I'd like to think that I played like a small part in kind of shifting it. Right. I just think that wrestling fans and crowds have always been. I think they've always been quite sophisticated, but now there's just no. Like there's no fooling them, right? Like if you're going to introduce someone and they're going to be a part of the product, if they're not all in, they're going to get booed out of the building, and no one wants their client to be embarrassed. It's like if your agent's pushing you to host Saturday Night Live, but you're not funny, then you have a bad agent. And I just think that nowadays people, if they're going to approach WWE or AEW, they're going to have to be like, okay, well, here's the new standard, right? Like the standard is Logan Paul and Bad Bunny. Like that's the standard. Are you up for that? Because if you're not, then just don't do it.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you so much for taking a few minutes. Good luck on the show.
Thanks,
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Take care.